Hey everyone, today's story is dark, shocking, and very hard to hear. We are going back to ancient Rome, one of the most powerful empires in history. Rome built roads, laws, and armies that changed the world. But behind the glory and power, there was also extreme cruelty. In this video, we will talk about what Roman soldiers really did to captured queens. These women were leaders, symbols of pride and hope for their people. When Rome defeated their kingdoms, their fate was often worse than death. What happened to them was meant to send fear across the world. This story will turn your stomach, but it also helps us understand how power worked in ancient times. Let's begin. First, we need to understand how the Romans saw war. For Rome, war was not just about land. It was about honor, fear, and control. When Rome defeated an enemy king, that victory was celebrated. But when they captured a queen, the message was even stronger. A queen was not just a woman. She was the heart of her nation. She represented culture, faith, and resistance. Breaking a queen meant breaking her people. Roman soldiers knew this very well. Captured queens were treated very differently from ordinary prisoners. Roman generals decided their fate, and mercy was rare. These women were often used as tools to show Rome's absolute power. For many captured queens, the first stage of captivity was deliberate humiliation. Stripped of their royal symbols, they were paraded through Roman camps or cities to erase their former authority in the eyes of both their people and Rome itself. Crowds were meant to see that even a crowned ruler could be reduced to a trophy of conquest. Chains, foreign clothing, and public mockery were not accidents. They were carefully chosen messages that resistance to Rome would always end in disgrace. Behind closed doors, their lives were entirely at the mercy of Roman command. Some queens were kept alive for years, not out of kindness, but because their existence served political purposes. They could be used as bargaining chips to control rebellious regions or as living warnings to other rulers thinking of defiance. Others were subjected to harsh confinement, isolation, and psychological cruelty designed to break their spirit long before any final decision about their fate was made. In the most public moments, these women were often forced to appear in triumphal processions, walking behind the general who had defeated them. For Rome, this was theater, a brutal performance of dominance meant to echo across the empire. The queen's suffering was not hidden. It was displayed, remembered, and retold as proof that Rome did not merely conquer lands, but crushed the very idea of sovereignty that stood against it. One of the most famous examples is Queen Boudica of Britain. She led a powerful rebellion against Roman rule. For a short time, she defeated Roman forces and burned their cities. Rome was humiliated. When the Romans finally crushed her rebellion, they wanted revenge. Although Boudica herself avoided capture by taking her own life, her story shows what Romans planned for queens like her. Captured royal women were often stripped of their dignity. Their royal clothes were taken away. Their jewelry, crowns, and symbols of power were removed. This was done in front of soldiers and crowds. For Rome, this was not random cruelty. It was a public lesson. A queen who once ruled now stood as a prisoner. Many captured queens were forced to march in Roman triumphs. A triumph was a massive victory parade in Rome. The streets were filled with cheering crowds. Soldiers marched proudly. Gold, weapons, and treasures were displayed. And then came the prisoners. Queens were chained, sometimes with heavy iron around their necks and wrists. They were forced to walk behind the general who defeated them. The crowd mocked them. People shouted insults. Some threw dirt and stones. Once the parade ended, the humiliation rarely stopped there. Captured queens were often dragged through the city as living trophies, their royal clothing torn away and replaced with rags to erase every sign of dignity. Roman crowds were taught to see them not as rulers, but as warnings. Their defeat was meant to entertain the masses and reinforce Rome's power, turning once revered women into spectacles of shame under the burning sun. For many, imprisonment followed the parade, and the conditions were brutal. Queens who once lived in palaces were thrown into dark, damp cells where food was scarce and guards showed no mercy. Some were interrogated relentlessly for information about remaining resistance, while others were deliberately kept alive just long enough to be displayed again during public games or political ceremonies. Survival itself became a form of suffering stretched out to satisfy Roman pride. In the most tragic cases, execution was carefully timed to serve propaganda. A queen might be killed days or even weeks after her capture, once Rome had extracted maximum fear and symbolism from her fate. Strangulation, starvation, or public killing were common, all carried out to send a clear message to Rome's enemies. Even the highest born, even those who wore crowns, were powerless before the empire, and stories of these punishments spread far beyond Rome. Ensuring terror did the work of conquest long after the soldiers had moved on. These women, once respected and feared, were turned into living trophies. This public humiliation was meant to erase their power forever. One tragic example is Cleopatra Selene, daughter of the famous Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. After Rome defeated her parents, Cleopatra Selene was taken to Rome as a child. She was paraded in a triumph when she was still very young. Imagine a royal child, dressed as a prisoner, walking through screaming crowds. Rome wanted the world to see that even Egypt's royal blood was now under Roman control. Although she later survived and ruled a small kingdom, her childhood trauma shows how Rome treated defeated royal families. Not all queens were allowed to live after the parade. Many were executed. Roman soldiers often killed captured queens after the triumph was over. Execution was usually done in secret, away from the crowds. Some were strangled. Others were locked away and left to die. Their deaths were slow and lonely. Rome believed that killing a queen removed any chance of rebellion. No leader meant no resistance. Imprisonment was another terrible fate. Captured queens were sometimes locked in Roman prisons for years. These prisons were dark, cold, and filthy. Food was poor, water was dirty, disease was common. Royal women who once lived in palaces now slept on stone floors. Guards treated them with no respect. They were constantly reminded that they were no longer queens. Their names were forgotten. They were called prisoners, nothing more. Psychological torture was also common. Roman soldiers and guards often mocked captured queens. They insulted their families, their gods, and their cultures. They told them their people had been killed or enslaved. They described cities burning and temples destroyed. Even if some of it was lies, the pain was real. This mental cruelty was meant to crush hope. A broken queen could no longer inspire rebellion. Some queens were forced into exile. Rome sometimes decided that killing a queen would make her a martyr. Instead, they sent her far away, alone and powerless. Exiled queens were placed in distant lands where they did not know the language or customs. They lived under watch, unable to return home. Their lives became silent prisons. They were alive, but their power was gone forever. Roman soldiers also used queens as political tools. Some were forced into unwanted marriages arranged by Rome. These marriages were meant to control territories and prevent uprisings. The queen's body became part of Roman strategy. Her children could be raised loyal to Rome. Her bloodline was reshaped to serve the empire. This was not love or respect. It was control. It is important to say something very clearly. These actions were brutal and inhuman, but they were not seen that way in ancient Rome. Romans believed that strength came from fear. Mercy was seen as weakness. Crushing enemies completely was considered smart rule. Captured queens were not viewed as victims. They were viewed as symbols to destroy. One lesser-known story is of Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra. She challenged Rome and ruled a powerful Eastern empire. She even claimed to be equal to Roman emperors. When Rome defeated her, she was captured and taken to Rome. Sources disagree about her final fate, but many say she was paraded in golden chains. Imagine the irony. Gold chains on a queen who once wore gold crowns. Some accounts say she was allowed to live in luxury later. Others say her life ended quietly. Either way, her capture showed Rome's message: no one is above us. The suffering of captured queens did not end with them. Their people suffered too. When a queen was captured, her land was often punished. Cities were looted. People were enslaved. Children were taken. Roman soldiers used terror to maintain control. The fate of queens was part of that system. Why does this story matter today? Because history often hides the pain behind glory. We hear about Roman roads and laws, but not always about the human cost. These queens were strong leaders. They fought for their people. But when they lost, they faced cruelty designed to erase them. Remembering their stories gives them back some dignity. Not all Roman soldiers were monsters. Some may have felt pity. Some may have questioned orders. But the system rewarded cruelty, not kindness. An empire built on fear must keep feeding that fear. Captured queens were used to do exactly that. When you think of ancient Rome, think of both sides. Think of the power and the beauty, but also the pain and suffering. These stories remind us how dangerous unchecked power can be. When leaders see others as symbols instead of humans, cruelty becomes normal. In the end, Roman soldiers did not just defeat queens on the battlefield. They tried to destroy their memory, their identity, and their legacy. But history remembers them. Their courage, resistance, and suffering still echo today. If you found this story shocking, share your thoughts in the comments. History is not always easy to hear, but it is important to understand. Thank you for watching.